Wildland protection is big business and our business. It is important that we all realize that the economy and defense of our nation depends upon the protection and wise use of our natural resources. One of the greatest potential threats to that economy is fire. We all know that fires destroy, both directly and indirectly, those natural resources without which none of us can exist. Our streams and lakes that supply us with the water we drink. Our farms and ranches that give us the food for our mouths. Yes, and from the forests themselves, the wood for our buildings. These and many other natural resources are constantly menaced by the possibility of wildfire. Wildfires start easily and spread rapidly under California's long, hot, dry summer weather conditions. To minimize fire damage to forests, watersheds, and rangelands, the California Division of Forestry has, for more than 30 years, been building a first attack fire suppression organization, trained to strike hard and strike effectively. Our progress is encouraging, for 95% of our fires, starting on lands protected by the division, are today controlled before they have burned more than 100 acres. It is the large campaign fire that is our real concern, for it is this type of fire that accounts for the lion's share of the watershed, forest, and rangeland burned over each year. Our immediate concern is focused primarily upon the administrative and management principles that we must all know and practice as a fire boss responsible for the control of a large campaign fire. The control of any fire, 10 acres or 10,000 acres in size, is dependent upon the coordinated direction of 3 definite functions. Suppression, which includes all of the forces engaged in combating the blaze on the actual perimeter. Service and supply, which involves obtaining, maintaining, and distributing facilities and supplies, men and equipment. Information, where all data for planning control of the fire is gathered and compiled. Coordination of this system is assumed by a fire administrator, who is known as the fire boss. On a small fire, the fire boss is personally able to direct all suppression action. He has been furnished on initial dispatch sufficient manpower and equipment to effectively control the fire. And he is personally able to gather all pertinent information necessary to accomplish effective suppression. On a large fire, the fire boss is no longer able to perform personally all functions effectively. As his fire line organization expands, he delegates functional responsibilities. A line boss is assigned the suppression activity. A plans and records boss, the gathering of information. Service and supply in a service and supply boss. We must approach every fire keenly aware of the overall job. We must learn to recognize immediately the signs of a major campaign and shift quickly from initial attack planning to campaign fire planning when these signs are apparent. Strong initial attack failed to control this fast-moving fire. Let's follow step by step actions taken by the fire boss as he directs the expansion of suppression forces, provides for their service and supply, and develops a system for gathering information that he must have in order to control this fire at a minimum size. The fire boss, having wisely devoted his attention and activities to the overall fire problem, has recognized early that his present forces cannot cope with the situation. As fire boss, his job now is to plan for the control of a large campaign fire. He immediately delegates fire line action to the line boss, outlining in detail all actions which have been initiated, and the disposition of equipment and manpower. The strategy for the ensuing hours is discussed, and information relating to cover, terrain, and weather conditions is turned over to the line boss. From notes already made, the fire boss starts ordering additional equipment, manpower, and supplies. This information is received by the unit dispatcher, who then refers to his unit fire plan to properly channel the request.
I need a 200-man fire camp setup, 2 25-man hand crews, a service and supply boss, 2 division bosses, and 4 sector bosses. 10-4? Better have Jim fly the fire right away and drop a map at the big flat. We'll set up there.
Before returning to the area where the camp is to be established, the fire boss takes advantage of an opportunity to do additional scouting from various observation points. A study of maps and aerial photos further assists him to gear his planning to the development of the fire. There is much to be done before this fire will be controlled. Proper management does not permit him to tie himself down to perform any single function. The fire boss makes himself available at his designated base of operations as soon as possible. One of his first jobs is to see that signs are posted on access roads so that the arriving equipment will be directed to headquarters. This duty is assigned to one of the first men to report in. Meanwhile, a scout has covered the fire area in a plane, making maps and taking notes on conditions along the fire perimeter. This information is dropped in the area of the fire campsite for use by the fire boss in his planning. From these notes, maps, and other information, he is in a position to more accurately estimate the probable size that the fire will reach during this burning period. He will also be able to properly assign his incoming crews and equipment, using this current material as a guide. He now breaks the overall fire into divisions and adjusts the location of control lines to conform with all of the knowledge he has gathered concerning the fire up to this time. A contact with his line boss to outline the latest developments keeps the fire line activity coordinated with his basic strategy and provides him with additional information. In selecting the fire camp site, he has given consideration to factors that can spell success or failure to the entire operation of the campaign, as the fire camp is to become headquarters and base of operations around which all of the activities of the fire will revolve. He thinks about shaded areas removed from the main camp for more comfortable daytime sleeping. Access roads which are available to both the fire camp and the fire line. Open land for parking areas with sufficient room for service and repair and for handling heavy equipment. As communications play a key role in fire control operations, he considers the problem of radio reception and access to existing telephone lines. Availability of water may also be important in some localities. The plans and records boss and the service and supply boss are among the first to arrive. The fire boss apprises them of the current fire situation and advises them of expected developments so that they may properly anticipate and plan their respective jobs. As we have seen, our entire organization is based upon these functions: suppression, service and supply, information. As overhead becomes available, they will be assigned to fill these fire line positions. All of these jobs must be performed, but they are filled only as required. After thoroughly discussing the problems, the fire boss delivers his notes on manpower, equipment, and supplies which he has ordered. It is then the individual responsibility of each of these key men to hand this information on to his own staff. With the material turned over to him by the fire boss, the plans and records boss in turn gives instructions to the men who will assist him in the installation of radio and telephone equipment, map sections, and record files. These jobs are all the responsibility of the plans and records boss. All are necessary to properly perform the function of gathering and compiling information. But these jobs, the record and timekeeper, the message center operator, the reconnaissance and map section, and the weather section, are filled only as circumstances require. After consulting with the service and supply boss concerning its location in relation to other camp functions, the information section is set up under the direction of the plans and records boss. It is his job to gather and compile for the fire boss all information needed for planning control of the fire. He must keep up-to-date status maps which show distribution of manpower and equipment on the line. He must be able to provide the fire boss with a list of manpower and equipment available for the next shift or for immediate use should an emergency condition develop. Maps, records, and communications are the fire tools for this man. Here an emergency telephone wire is being laid between the information section, time and record keeper, and the equipment transportation man. Whenever possible, the emergency line is also connected to existing telephone line installations. Scouts are assigned as often as necessary by the plans and records boss to check on portions of the fire about which information is not readily available from the line forces. The service and supply boss has meanwhile called a conference with the men selected as camp foreman, supply man, equipment and transportation man, and property man to give them a general description of the camp layout. As in the function of information, all of these jobs, supply, camp foreman, equipment and transportation, property, and communication servicing must be performed for good organization. But they too are filled only as conditions require. Often, one man may be responsible for more than one of these sub-functions. Each unit should be set up for ease of operation. The kitchen has roped-off areas for storing supplies and channeling traffic. Receptacles for used dishes and garbage disposal are easily accessible to both kitchen and the eating area. Garbage is finally disposed in a large pit isolated at least 200 feet from the main camp. The portable power plant is an important but noisy guest and is located away from the sleeping area. Always placed in a central location and plainly marked is the camp first aid kit. I don't have to tell you why the latrine should be plainly marked and also isolated. The completed camp shows that the service and supply boss has placed the functional divisions in the order of their normal usage. The parking area has been designated to occupy the first point of entry to the main camp. Adjoining the parking area is the equipment servicing area, which includes essential service items. In entering the camp from the parking area, we find first the time and record keeper. Close by are facilities for blankets and tools where the property man supervises their distribution or repair. Probably considered by many to be our most important facility, we find the kitchen next in line, with particular care having been given here to provide shade and protection from dust. To minimize confusion, the information section is placed some distance from the other facilities. Being the nerve center of the whole organization, it should always be located so that there will be little interference from other camp activities. Serious consideration is also given to protection from any sudden shift in the fire. As we have seen, close supervision during the fire's initial stages made it possible for the fire boss to plan for the arrival of manpower and equipment in time for the night shift. Incidentally, here is a good example of the need to remove the entrance to parking areas some distance from the main camp. It is evident that were this equipment to be routed close to camp installations, dust would become a major problem. The first crews to arrive in camp are men that were ordered in by the fire boss in his original communication with the unit dispatcher. This pickup crew will be fed and tooled preparatory to being sent out onto the fire line. The foreman of this CYA crew has already checked with transportation. These men have already been fed at their home camp and remain on the truck, for they are ready for immediate dispatch to the fire line. It is imperative to the smooth operation and efficiency of the entire campaign that all personnel report at once to the timekeeper upon arrival. The timekeeper can then transmit arrival information to plans and records so manpower can be assigned with the minimum of delay. This makes possible a quick conference between the fire boss and the foreman, at which time the foreman is given his instructions. This foreman rejoins his crew. The crew carries its own tools and is ready to be dispatched directly to the fire line for night duty, where the foreman will receive his final assignment from the line boss. Food for the midnight meal, not as yet prepared, will be dispatched to them later. After unloading, the pickup crew reports to the timekeeper where they are registered by time slips. A foreman is then assigned to them. This foreman will stay with them in camp and on the fire line for the duration of their activity on the fire. Meal tickets for this crew are issued to the foreman. The very nature of fire control work requires equipment to be ready to go on a moment's notice. Prompt attention should be given by the equipment and transportation man as soon as he receives equipment to see that the necessary servicing is done immediately. We can ill afford equipment failures at any time, but here the results could be costly in terms of time lost, the fire lost, or even lives lost. The information section is by now in full operation. Communications have been established with all fire areas and the unit dispatching office. The one thing we can do about the weather is to keep abreast of its many and sometimes rapid changes. Strategy modifications are often necessary because of weather changes. Scouts dispatched earlier have reached the areas in question and now begin to report their findings directly from the scene. These observations are relayed to the information section. Such reports originating from these crucial areas keep the information section and the fire boss informed of the ever-changing picture. All important changes are shown on this fire situation map. It portrays the current fire edge, line progress, manpower and equipment deployment. It is one of the most valuable tools in fire management. Without this constant and close contact, valuable time might be lost in taking advantage of favorable and opportune conditions. As these activities progress, the fire boss is keeping close contact with all phases of the entire organization. As trucks and other equipment arrive, the transportation officer immediately reports their arrival by telephone. The preparation of availability lists as well as dispatching will thus be greatly facilitated. Other overhead arrive. After they check their equipment in with the equipment and transportation man, they will immediately report to the time and record keeper. The arrival of this additional manpower at the proper time can only be accomplished by anticipating their need in advance. This is particularly true when such men may have to travel long distances. The placing of road directional signs at strategic points assists volunteers or pickup labor and outside overhead who are unfamiliar with the territory to readily find their way into camp. For efficient organization with a minimum of confusion and loss of time, it is essential that all personnel, administrative, pickup, and visitors, check in and out with the timekeeper. Here, qualification cards for new arrivals are presented. In turn, the timekeeper reports all such information to the plans and records section in order that they may be kept constantly up to date on the movement of men and equipment. It is important to the efficiency of the camp that the kitchen activities be coordinated with the overall plan of action. Having been advised of the anticipated arrival of all crews, the service and supply boss has had time to arrange through the camp foreman for the preparation of sufficient food. These crews can therefore be fed and dispatched immediately to the line as relief. Meal slips are collected as the crew enters the kitchen area. The purpose of these meal slips is to enable the feeding of these men as a unit, where a priority of feeding may be necessary. It can be seen how confusion can be minimized with this system. It also gives the timekeeper a chance to keep constant check on personnel movement. At times in the past, no specific eating area has been designated. In such cases, crew units have become broken and scattered, and the chow line activity has been confused. The eating area is selected with thought for the comfort of the men themselves and is removed from the kitchen area. For obvious sanitary reasons and convenience for the kitchen crew, garbage and dirty dishes are deposited in the proper receptacles by each man as he finishes eating. Proper labeling of such receptacles is important. Crews that have been or may be scheduled for early morning work are issued blankets by the property man. Each foreman signs for the blankets and will be responsible for their return. It is important that such crews be bedded down early enough to allow them sufficient hours of sleep before being called for duty. I would like to emphasize again the importance of keeping each crew together as a unit with its respective crew leader, so that when it is needed, it can be quickly and easily located. Prior to going to sleep himself, the fire boss has designated an early hour for a meeting with his strategy board. Even the general needs his sleep. Being available on a 24-hour basis does not mean that he should go without some rest. He must remember that tomorrow will be as important as today. The plans officer during the night hours is in direct communication with the line boss, scouts, and various division bosses on the fire line. When the morning strategy board meets, all information, including the current status of the fire, line progress, and special weather forecast, has been compiled by the plans and records boss. In order to relieve the night shift crews by daylight, the hour for the strategy board meeting was set by the fire boss to allow sufficient time for this conference, awakening the men, feeding them, checking out tools, briefing overhead, and transporting the crews to the fire line. The plans and records boss has prepared maps of the fire showing it as nearly up to the minute as possible. Using as a guide all available information, this board will work out the day's strategy, assign overhead and crews to divisions, and outline the various methods of operation for each division or special problem. Sufficient copies of assignment sheets and maps are made for all overhead. This avoids verbal instructions which are too often misinterpreted. Also present at this conference are the day shift line boss and the night shift line boss. At the appointed hour, the day shift crews are awakened, along with their overhead. Crews that are not scheduled for early morning shifts are allowed to remain asleep. The division bosses are briefed by the fire boss and given their respective assignments. After picking up, cleaning, folding, and turning in their blankets to the tool tenders, the crews are fed. They are again given meal slips so that they will eat as a unit. The cooks have long before started preparation of this early morning meal and are ready to serve. The crews having the most distance to travel or who must be on the line earliest eat first. Overhead for these men are fed at the same time. Each crew boss checks himself out along with his crew. The timekeeper, following procedure, advises plans and records that this crew has checked out of the fire camp for the fire line. When the crew arrives at the assigned location, the vehicle is parked in a safe spot. If it is to be left without a driver, special attention is given to protection of the unit from fire damage. The crew members are issued their tools, and one man is usually assigned to carry lunches, extra water, and first aid kits. Proper briefing and organization saves confusion and time in getting crews on the line. Nearby, a bulldozer operator on night shift is being relieved as prearranged. This should coincide as nearly as possible with the crew shift change. Before the night operator leaves, equipment is completely serviced by a field service unit. In arranging a servicing schedule, careful planning is necessary to avoid having equipment lay idle for lack of fuel. The line boss must coordinate this activity with the fire line work. Contacts are made with the various division bosses and the equipment and transportation man, who must see that the equipment gets the proper servicing. It should not be overlooked that the relieving of crews at the appointed time pays big dividends. Not only is it a morale booster, but it allows sufficient time for these exhausted men to be properly fed and rested so that they may again be effectively used on the following shift. Tired or disgruntled men on fire line duty handicap the entire suppression effort. It is vitally important that crews do not leave their line before the arrival of relief. While the crew shift is being made, the day and night overhead discuss line conditions. Good judgment must be exercised by a new division boss, since last-minute developments may necessitate modifying the strategy for his division. Information as to the shift in line crews is radioed to the fire camp. Notice is also given that the relief dozer operator has arrived, and that both the night shift crew and the night dozer operator are en route to camp. This information is recorded by the plans and records section. The service and supply boss will instruct his camp foreman to prepare for these incoming men. They must be fed and their tools and equipment serviced. Whenever possible, the same transportation equipment should be used for movement of crews to and from the line. A more complete utilization of equipment may be realized in this way. Tools must be deposited in one part of the truck before loading men. This serves as protection for the tools and a safety measure for the men. Carelessness increases with fatigue. Where steps are not provided and tailgates must be used, great care must be exercised to prevent injury. Crews arriving in camp after duty on the fire line naturally are tired, impatient, and perhaps a little difficult to manage. However, It is extremely important that these men be kept together as a unit. Their natural tendency is to scatter, and by scattering, the job of properly caring for them becomes increasingly difficult. Accompanied by their crew leader, each unit turns in their tools to the property man. The crew leader, being responsible for the return of the tools, sees that tool slips are removed from the files and checked against the items returned. All tools are checked over by the property man for breakage and are repaired or sharpened before being replaced in the tool supply stockpile. The crew leader reports the arrival of himself and crew to the timekeeper, who records the information. Meal slips for the unit are issued. The timekeeper immediately notifies the plans and records section of arrival in camp of crew and overhead so that they may be interrogated when needed. After eating and checking out blankets, the crew and crew leader are directed to the sleeping area, which has been selected to be as far removed as possible from the bustle and noise of the camp activities. The camp foreman is advised of the location of each sleeping crew. In order to survey the entire situation at this crucial time, the fire boss arranges for an aerial reconnaissance flight over the fire area. From these observations, he may temper his strategy for the ensuing hours of operation. After surveillance of the fire from the air has been completed, the fire boss may need to adjust his operations somewhat. He takes advantage of the localized weather forecast from the Mobile Weather Station. Such modifications as are necessary can be arranged through radio contact with the line boss and the divisions affected. Even though this day's operations are hardly underway, he must now consider the requirements of the next shift. He discusses the possible length of the campaign with the service and supply boss and the plans and records boss, as this will regulate the men, equipment, and supplies needed. After receiving the information he needs, the service and supply boss contacts his staff in order to determine the requirements of each camp function. Consideration must be given to supplies for feeding expected personnel, requirements for blankets, flashlights, tools, canteens, and other equipment. The transportation officer must estimate his needs for gasoline, oil, diesel fuel, and other supplies. The list of supplies necessary for the entire camp is delivered by the supply man to the message center, which contacts the unit dispatcher by telephone or radio. Unit dispatcher receives the order and, with the fire plan as a guide, places the necessary orders. Careful coordination here is needed to dovetail camp orders with other movements of men, equipment, and supplies. Constant vigilance must be exercised on all fires to meet the unexpected without loss of time. Close communication through aerial observation should be maintained when the problem includes remote regions not easily visible to ground forces. Until the last spark is out, there is always danger of this: a spot fire or a bad fire line break. Serious breaks in the fire line require action at the earliest possible moment. Early detection expedites the proper placement of men and equipment for effective control. The plans and records section accumulates the necessary information from its various intelligence sources in order that the fire boss may analyze the situation as accurately as possible and estimate his need. After consulting with the line boss regarding the use of forces now on the line, the fire boss orders men and equipment presently standing by in camp for such emergencies to be immediately briefed and dispatched to the break. Sound management provides a reserve standby force for these unforeseen circumstances. Other fire areas will thus not be jeopardized by depleting on the line or relief forces to meet this added threat. This is the focal point of our endeavors: to have the proper equipment and the proper tools at the right places when they are needed. Only with a complete knowledge of all of those things which influence the fire and of the available forces with which to combat it can the fire boss effectively adapt the organization to cope with the rapidly changing situation. Control of major campaign fires with minimum loss calls for a high degree of administrative efficiency on the part of every member of the fire line organization. It is teamwork that produces results. Although the excitement may be lacking, mop-up and patrol operations are of equal importance to any other phase of fire suppression. Crews must be constantly alert for smoldering snags, fire in stumps or roots, rolling material on steep slopes, and other hazards near the lines which are an aftermath of every fire. They must be considered as dangerous until dead out. Going one step further, I heartily recommend an immediate board of review at the conclusion of each major campaign fire, directed toward the improvement of our fire line administrative organization. It is at this meeting that altogether the responsible persons can closely analyze their efforts, pick out errors, and benefit by their collective experience. As we have seen, the fire boss is the fire general, responsible for overall supervision of service and supply, planning, and suppression activities. He must have an efficient base of operation and be in communication with it at all times. He must be willing to vest responsibility for suppression in his line boss while he himself coordinates all functions. He must delegate responsibility for establishing the camp and obtaining supplies to the service and supply boss, and for the establishment of an intelligence system to his plans and records boss. He must be a strategist and a manager. In short, he runs the show. The fire is out. The campaign is over. Those words are the key to the purpose of this film. Its completion covered a period of more than 6 months of cooperative effort by the members of this division and the producing company, for which I wish to express my appreciation, for without their valuable cooperation, this film record would never have been possible. I sincerely hope that you have found it helpful, so that in the future we may all find it possible to say, the fire is out, dead out.